Imagine living in peace on your own land, only to watch a stubborn neighbor in a shiny SUV barrel through your private ranch gate like she owns the road. At first, it seemed like a mistake, a careless shortcut. But soon, it became a habit, and every time the gate swung open, so did the flood of anger and frustration. The more I tried to stop her, the bolder she became, until one day, I realized there was only one way left to put an end to it. What would you do if someone kept violating your home like that? Life on my ranch had always been about simplicity and hard work, not drama. The morning started early, with the sun creeping over the hills and bathing the fields in gold. The smell of fresh hay and the sound of horses stirring in the barn made each day feel like an unspoken promise: peace, independence, and the freedom that comes with owning your own land. For me, that was everything. I had worked years to secure this property, poured my savings and sweat into the soil, and built a home where I could finally breathe without the chaos of city living or the weight of neighbors watching every move. The ranch wasn't just a house and a few acres. It was a way of life. Fences lined the fields, cattle grazed freely, and the winding dirt driveway that cut through my land ended at a tall, heavy ranch gate, the kind of gate that symbolized both privacy and protection. That gate wasn't just metal and hinges. It was a boundary, a reminder that this land was mine, and anyone who wanted to cross it needed my permission. My wife, Emily, shared in that pride. She was disciplined and strong, a uniformed officer who balanced her demanding work with the rhythm of ranch life. Together, we created a balance of order and freedom. She brought precision, I brought grit, and between us, the ranch thrived. Friends would visit, marveling at the view from the porch, the wide skies, and the feeling of being far from the petty arguments and politics that seemed to plague suburban neighborhoods and HOA-controlled communities. That was the beauty of it out here. We thought we had escaped all of that, but peace, as I came to learn, is often temporary when entitlement is involved. The first hint of trouble was subtle, almost too small to care about at the time. A neighbor, not the closest one, but close enough, began driving a little too fast on the shared road that bordered my property. It wasn't an HOA community, but many of the nearby landowners carried themselves like it was, trying to enforce unwritten rules about who belonged and who didn't. Most of them respected boundaries, waving politely when they passed by, keeping to their own land and minding their own business. And then there was Karen. She had the kind of confidence that made people uneasy, the sort of boldness that ignored lines, both spoken and unspoken. Karen didn't believe in waiting or asking. She believed in taking. She drove a shiny SUV that seemed too polished for the dusty roads out here, and every time she passed by, there was this unmistakable sense that she was looking for an easier way to get where she wanted, even if it meant cutting corners. The day I first saw my ranch gate swing open to her car, I froze. She wasn't invited, she wasn't lost, and she certainly wasn't welcome. She had decided on her own that my private gate and my private road would now serve as her shortcut. It was brazen, almost surreal, to watch her tires kick up dirt on a path she had no right to use. At that moment, I brushed it off as arrogance. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she thought she had permission. I closed the gate and went about my day, but one mistake turned into two. Two turned into a pattern. And before long, it was clear this wasn't an accident at all. Karen had decided that my gate meant nothing, that my land, my fences, and my hard work were simply obstacles to her convenience. What frustrated me most wasn't just the trespassing. It was the violation of trust. Out here, land means something. Boundaries are respected because they protect not only property but peace of mind. When a neighbor crosses those lines without care, it's not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. What if livestock wandered out? What if equipment was damaged? What if Emily or I were put at risk because someone couldn't be bothered to drive around the proper way? At first, I tried to reason with myself. Surely, she'd stop once she realized she was crossing someone else's property. Surely, she'd think twice before doing it again. But deep down, I already knew the truth. People like Karen didn't stop. They escalated. The normal rhythm of our life started to feel interrupted. I'd find the gate unlatched at odd hours, the tracks of her SUV pressed deep into the dirt road I had built and maintained. Emily would shake her head, frustrated, reminding me that not everyone respected authority until it was forced on them. We tried to ignore it, but every time we sat on the porch, waiting for the quiet evening breeze, the thought lingered, would Karen come barreling through again? That kind of uncertainty eats away at you. It turns peace into tension, calm into vigilance. And soon, it wasn't just about the inconvenience. It was about the principle. If she could drive through whenever she wanted, what was next? Would she bring friends through? Would she push the boundary even further, daring us to confront her? The thing about people who don't respect boundaries is this: the more they get away with, the bolder they become. And Karen was no exception. What started as occasional trespassing soon became regular. She wasn't just cutting through, she was claiming it as her right. Every tire mark was like a slap in the face, a reminder that she thought she was untouchable. And the more she ignored my land, the more determined I became not to let it stand. Looking back, I can see the turning point. It wasn't a dramatic showdown. It wasn't even a heated argument. It was a quiet realization, sitting on that porch with Emily one evening, that something had to change. Karen wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to listen. And if I didn't take action soon, I'd lose more than just the use of my gate. I'd lose the very respect and security that ranch life was built on. That was when I decided, the next time she came through, she would find out that my gate wasn't just a barrier. It was a line in the sand, and crossing it would come with consequences she would never forget. Karen's first few trespasses might have been brushed off as careless arrogance, but what came next made it clear that this was no misunderstanding. It was a battle of willpower, and the kind of battle she was picking wasn't one fought with fairness or respect. It was one built on stubbornness, entitlement, and the belief that rules only applied to everyone else. The more she used my ranch gate, the bolder she became. Where she once slipped through quietly, she now drove with the kind of confidence that screamed, "This is my right." She didn't glance around, didn't slow down, didn't act like she was doing anything wrong. And the tracks she left behind weren't just tire marks anymore, they were a declaration. At first, I thought I was dealing with nothing more than a brazen neighbor. But Karen wasn't just acting alone. She had something else backing her, the homeowners association. Now, my ranch wasn't directly tied into their HOA, which was part of the problem. The land had its own zoning, its own independence, which was exactly why I bought it. But the HOA controlled the nearby subdivision, and Karen was an active member, one of those committee chair types who seemed to live for nitpicking and enforcing rules. She wasn't just another entitled neighbor. She was someone with a little bit of power and a whole lot of ego. And she decided my ranch was going to be her next project. The first letter showed up one Tuesday afternoon, folded neatly into an envelope with the HOA logo stamped across the front. I remember the weight of it in my hand, heavier than paper should ever feel. Inside, the letter was polite on the surface but dripping with condescension. It informed me that several members of the community had complained about the unsightly ranch gate at the end of my driveway. According to them, it did not fit the aesthetic guidelines of the neighborhood. I read it twice, then a third time, stunned. My ranch wasn't even under their jurisdiction. They had no authority over my land, no right to tell me what kind of gate I could or couldn't have. And yet, here was this letter, dressed up in official wording, acting like I was somehow obligated to comply. Emily read it over my shoulder and let out a sharp laugh. "They're fishing," she said. "They know they can't touch you, but they're testing to see if you'll fold." And she was right. That was exactly what it was, a test. I ignored the letter, thinking it would end there. But Karen wasn't the type to accept being ignored. A week later, I got another envelope. This one wasn't a polite suggestion. It was a fine. $200 for non-compliance with community standards. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with trespassing anymore. I was dealing with harassment. The fines kept coming. Every week, like clockwork, another envelope appeared. $200, $300, $500. They piled up like a collection of threats, each one more ridiculous than the last. According to them, my gate violated guidelines. My driveway was inappropriate. Even the fencing along my pastures was suddenly not in harmony with the neighborhood's appearance. None of it made sense. None of it was legal. But that didn't matter to Karen and her HOA friends. They weren't trying to follow rules. They were trying to wear me down. And while I wasn't under their control, the harassment itself had weight. Mortgage companies, banks, even insurance providers sometimes took HOA disputes seriously, even when they weren't valid. Karen knew that. She was counting on the pressure, counting on me to crack before she did. I'll admit, for a while, the stress got to me. Every day I came home to another envelope on my porch, another threat buried in legal-sounding language. And every evening, as I sat on that porch with Emily, watching the sun sink behind the hills, I felt the peace I had built slipping away. That ranch was supposed to be freedom. Instead, it was becoming a battleground. But Karen wasn't content with just letters and fines. She doubled down on her trespassing. If she had a late appointment or wanted to shave a few minutes off her drive, she cut through my gate like it was hers. And if the gate was locked, she found ways around it. More than once, I found the lock tampered with, the hinges strained from being forced open. The boldness was infuriating. It wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was blatant disrespect. And then came the threats. It started subtly, slipped into conversation at the local grocery store. Karen spotted me in an aisle and smiled, that practiced, sugary smile that never touched her eyes. She leaned in and said, "You know, it would be easier for everyone if you just removed the gate. After all, community harmony is so much more important than pride." Pride. That was the word she used, like my boundaries and my property rights were nothing more than ego. I ignored her, walked away, but the word stuck. And when the next fine came in the mail, this time for $1,000, I knew she wasn't bluffing. She was escalating. The harassment bled into other parts of my life, too. Contractors I hired suddenly backed out of jobs, saying they didn't want trouble with the HOA. A local feed supplier raised his rates on me after hearing complaints. Even my mailbox was mysteriously damaged one morning. The post splintered like it had been rammed. It was all connected. I could feel Karen's hand in every inconvenience, every disruption. She wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. She was trying to break me. But if she thought intimidation would work, she was wrong. Because while she was busy playing politics, I was quietly gathering evidence. Every letter, every fine, every tampered lock, I documented it all. Emily helped, her law enforcement instincts kicking in. We built a file so thick it could choke a filing cabinet. And as the pile grew, so did my resolve. The turning point came one evening after I discovered fresh tire tracks across my pasture. Not just the road, the pasture. Karen had apparently grown tired of the gate entirely and decided to blaze her own trail across my land. That was the moment the anger turned into determination. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I walked the tracks, my fists clenched, and I knew it was time. This wasn't about fines or gates or even trespassing anymore. It was about principle, about proving that no matter how much power she thought she had, she couldn't rewrite the rules to suit herself. But as much as I wanted to strike back immediately, Emily reminded me of something important. Karen thrived on reaction. If I snapped too soon, she'd spin it, twist it, and use it against me. So we planned, quietly, patiently, and while we waited, Karen kept escalating. She called the county inspector on me, trying to get me cited for unlicensed agricultural activity. When that failed, she staged photos of my gate supposedly blocking access to emergency vehicles and circulated them at an HOA meeting. Lies piled on lies, each one more desperate than the last, and yet, with every move she made, she gave me more to work with. More evidence. More proof of her harassment. By the time she drove through my gate again, this time leaving a deep rut in the dirt road from reckless speeding, I was ready. The trap was set. The night I set the trap, the air felt heavy, the kind of weight that presses down on your chest and makes every sound sharper, every shadow darker. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked down the driveway to check the gate one last time. It stood tall and solid, the same ranch-style barrier I'd built with my own hands. Only this time reinforced with something Karen wasn't expecting. Steel posts buried deep into the ground, bracing hidden within the wood. To the eye, it looked unchanged, but to anyone trying to ram or force their way through, it was a wall. Emily stood by me, arms crossed, her uniform jacket draped casually over her shoulder. She wasn't on duty, but the presence of that badge was enough to remind me that we weren't just two homeowners defending property. We were standing up against harassment, intimidation, and outright lawlessness. Karen had made it clear she believed the gate was hers to ignore. I had made it clear that this night would prove her wrong. It didn't take long. Around p.m., headlights appeared at the far end of the road. The hum of an engine carried across the quiet fields, steady, unbothered, and titled. My chest tightened. Emily gave me a look that was half warning, half encouragement. Karen's SUV slowed as it approached. Then, without hesitation, she pressed forward, straight for the gate. No pause, no respect, just that same reckless arrogance. The moment her bumper hit the gate, there was a sound like thunder, a violent crash followed by the shriek of twisting metal. The reinforced structure didn't budge. Instead, Karen's SUV jolted violently, the front crumpling on impact. The headlights flickered as if stunned, then died out, plunging the road into partial darkness. I stood frozen for a heartbeat, adrenaline surging. Then Emily's voice broke the silence. She's trapped. We moved quickly, approaching the SUV. The hood was smoking, the air thick with the stench of burned rubber and oil. Karen sat behind the wheel, wide-eyed, her hands gripping it so tightly her knuckles were bone white. For once, the smug confidence was gone, replaced by raw shock when Emily shone her flashlight through the window. Karen flinched, her face pale and tight. Step out, Emily said, her tone calm but firm, carrying that natural authority that had always unnerved people who thought they were untouchable. Karen didn't move at first. She stared at us like she couldn't comprehend what had just happened, like the rules she thought she lived above had finally betrayed her. Then, slowly, she opened the door, her heels scraping against the gravel as she stepped out into the night air. Her SUV sat mangled behind her. The once pristine vehicle now dented, smoking, humiliated much like its driver, and that was when the shouting began. "You set me up!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "This is entrapment. This is illegal. You're going to pay for this." Her words echoed across the quiet land, sharp and shrill, but there was no power in them anymore. The sight of her screaming in front of her wrecked car, the broken image of her authority, stripped away every ounce of credibility she thought she had. I stayed silent, letting her rant, because the truth was already louder than her voice. The gate stood unbroken behind me, a symbol that her lies, her fines, her threats had all been powerless against reality. But Karen wasn't done. She lunged closer, pointing her finger in my face, spitting accusations. "You think you're smart? You think you can humiliate me? I'll take this to the board, to the county, to court if I have to. You'll regret ever crossing me." That was when Emily stepped forward. Calm, steady, unflinching. "Karen," she said evenly, "you've trespassed. You've harassed. You've destroyed property. And now you've caused damage to yourself by trying to force entry onto land that doesn't belong to you. Do you realize what you've just admitted to?" Karen froze. Just for a second, her eyes flicked between us, the gears in her mind spinning frantically, trying to find a way out. But for once, there wasn't one. The trap wasn't just physical. It was legal, documented, ironclad. I watched the color drain from her face as Emily pulled out her phone, snapping photos of the wreck, the gate, the tire tracks leading straight to the impact. Each click of the camera shutter was another nail in Karen's coffin. She tried again to bluster, but her voice cracked under the weight of the evidence piling against her. You can't do this to me," she stammered, her bravado crumbling. "I'm on the HOA board. People will back me. They always back me." But the words sounded hollow, even to her, because for the first time, Karen wasn't in control. The following morning, the fallout began. News of the crash spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Photos circulated not just of the mangled SUV, but of Karen herself, standing red-faced and furious while Emily calmly documented everything. Neighbors who once nodded politely at her now whispered behind her back. The board that had given her free rein to torment others suddenly grew quiet, unwilling to be dragged into her mess, and when the county officials reviewed the evidence, the repeated trespassing, the harassment letters, the staged photos, the bogus fines, they didn't see a victim. They saw a bully who had finally run headfirst into the consequences of her own arrogance. Karen was fined thousands for property damage. Her insurance skyrocketed. And worst of all, she was forced to step down from the HOA board under pressure from her own peers, who were desperate to distance themselves from her scandal. For years, she had wielded power like a weapon, using the HOA as her shield. But that shield was gone now, shattered by the undeniable truth of her own actions. I'll never forget the last time I saw her at a board meeting, sitting in the back row instead of at the front. She didn't speak. She didn't sneer. She didn't command the room the way she used to. She just sat there, silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if the weight of her own downfall was too heavy to lift. And as I walked past her that day, the words rang clear in my mind, words I never said out loud but carried with me all the same. "You brought this on yourself." The gate still stands to this day, strong, unbroken, and silent, a reminder of the night arrogance met consequences head on. And yet, as satisfying as the moment was, it wasn't the end. Because the real impact, the lasting change, came in what happened afterward. The days after the crash were almost surreal. For so long, Karen had been the storm hanging over my family, and suddenly, the thunder was gone. In its place was silence, not the uneasy quiet of waiting for her next move, but a heavy, satisfying stillness. For the first time in years, I could stand at my gate, look down the long stretch of road, and know it was mine, protected, respected, and free from intrusion. But while the physical clash had ended, the real resolution came in the ripple effects that spread far beyond that single night. Because when someone like Karen falls, it isn't just a stumble. It's a collapse that shakes the ground under everyone who enabled her. The very next week, the HOA scrambled to contain the firestorm. They called an emergency board meeting, not at the clubhouse like usual, but over a hastily arranged Zoom call, perhaps because they knew too many neighbors would show up in person with questions they couldn't answer. The agenda was short, but the tension was thick. Karen's role on the board, her behavior, and the damage she had caused. The faces on my screen that evening were stiff, uneasy, and defensive. These were the same people who had signed off on Karen's bogus fines, who had turned a blind eye to her harassment, who had chosen silence rather than conflict. But now, they were staring into their webcams, forced to confront the monster they had allowed to grow. When the motion came to remove her, it wasn't even close. Unanimous. Karen was stripped of her title, her voting rights, and her little empire of intimidation. The board's president, a man who had once defended her at every turn, resigned the very next day, citing stress and personal reasons. In truth, he couldn't stand to face the same neighbors he had failed to protect. Word spread fast. By the weekend, you could hear it in the way people spoke at the mailboxes, see it in the subtle relief on their faces as they walked their dogs. For years, Karen had been untouchable, but now she was just another neighbor, stripped of authority, carrying the weight of her own disgrace. For Emily and me, the shift was even more personal. Suddenly, the phone calls stopped. The letters stopped. No more envelopes with fines for grass that was supposedly an inch too long. No more threats about paint shades. No more accusations of rule breaking where none existed. Our mailbox, once a source of dread, became ordinary again. But the victory wasn't just in the silence. It was in the way our neighbors began to see us differently. At first, they approached cautiously, offering small nods or tentative comments. But soon, it turned into real conversation, stories about the ways Karen had harassed them. 2. Tales of fines, threats, and whispered gossip meant to keep them in line. One man, an older retiree who lived 2 streets over, told me how Karen had fined him hundreds for having a shed that supposedly violated visibility rules. He had paid it because he didn't think he had a choice. Another woman admitted that she had stopped gardening in her front yard after Karen criticized her for planting flowers outside the approved palette. These weren't just minor annoyances. They were daily erosions of dignity, the kind that wear people down until they accept misery as normal. Hearing their stories made me realize just how deep Karen's influence had spread. She hadn't just harassed me. She had created a culture of fear, using the HOA as her personal weapon. And by standing up to her, by setting that trap and refusing to back down, we hadn't just freed ourselves. We had cracked the spell she held over the entire neighborhood. But freedom doesn't come without cost. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. Even after the crash, even after losing her seat on the board, she tried to claw back power. She filed complaints with the county, accusing me of building an illegal barrier and claiming my reinforced gate was a safety hazard. She even threatened to sue. Although her lawyer quickly abandoned the case when he saw the overwhelming evidence against her, her persistence might have been infuriating, but in truth, it only made her look weaker. Each failed attempt chipped away at the last shreds of her credibility. Neighbors who once might have sided with her began avoiding her altogether, unwilling to be dragged into her mess. The woman who had once strutted through HOA meetings like a queen now walked the streets with her head down, muttering to herself as if the whole world had betrayed her, and maybe it had. Months passed, and the memory of that night faded into something larger, a legend of sorts. The story of Karen versus the gate became neighborhood folklore, retold at backyard barbecues and whispered during late-night walks. Some people laughed, some shook their heads in disbelief, but everyone agreed on one thing: it was the moment the neighborhood changed. As for me, the impact was more personal than public. For years, Karen had forced me into a role I never wanted: the embattled homeowner, the man always fighting back, the one under siege. But now, I could just be myself again. I could work on the ranch without glancing over my shoulder. I could enjoy evenings on the porch with Emily without waiting for headlights to appear at the end of the road. Still, I didn't let my guard down completely. The gate remained stronger than ever, both as a physical barrier and as a symbol. It wasn't just wood and steel. It was a reminder that no one, no matter how entitled or powerful they believe themselves to be, has the right to trample over another person's peace. The lesson wasn't lost on Emily either. She had always believed in standing firm, in using truth and law as shields against injustice. But even she admitted that sometimes The only way to stop a bully is to set a boundary so solid, so undeniable, that they break themselves against it. And that's exactly what happened. Looking back now, I realize Karen's downfall wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about finally holding accountable someone who had spent years twisting rules to suit herself, someone who had thrived on fear and intimidation. And while the crash, the photos, the fallout, all of that was dramatic, the real victory was quieter. It was the freedom to live without constant harassment. It was in the solidarity that grew among neighbors once they realized they weren't alone. In the end, Karen never fully recovered. She kept her house, but she lost everything else that mattered to her: her power, her influence, her audience. The HOA moved on without her, adopting new policies that actually made sense. One's focused on maintaining the community rather than policing it. As for me, I learned something I'll never forget. Bullies only win as long as people let them. The moment you stop giving them power, the moment you draw a line they can't cross, their empire begins to crumble. And sometimes that line isn't just drawn in sand. Sometimes it's built of wood and steel, anchored deep into the ground, standing tall against arrogance and entitlement. So when I look at that gate now, I don't just see a piece of property. I see a story. A story of resistance, of justice, of a battle that turned the tide for an entire neighborhood. And maybe that's the real takeaway for anyone watching. When faced with unfairness, when confronted with someone who abuses their position, you don't have to live in fear. You don't have to accept their rules as the end of the story. Sometimes, standing your ground literally is the most powerful move you can make, because in the end, the bully will always reveal themselves. And when they do, the fall is inevitable. So I'll ask you this: if it were your home, your land, your peace on the line, how far would you go to protect it? This was today's secret. Every shed hides a secret, but remember, the shed never stays quiet for long. Until next time, Secret Shed Stories.